She asked her billionaire best friend to take her virginity, but she never expected he would want to keep her forever. Before we go any deeper into how a single reckless request turned 2 decades of friendship upside down, tell us where you are watching from and what time it is. And if you believe in taking crazy chances for love, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss any of our next stories. Jenna Carter had always imagined her first time differently. She pictured candlelight soft music, sheets tangled with someone who knew how to make her forget every scar life had left on her. But what she never pictured was asking the one person she trusted most to be the one. And even now, sitting alone in a tiny corner booth of her favorite coffee shop, she could not believe she was about to do this. Outside the windows, Boston was wrapped in a soft blanket of late January snow. Flakes drifted past the streetlights, catching in Jenna's hair every time she had stepped outside to pace and breathe. She glanced down at her phone again, the screen glowing back at her with the unsent message. One line of text that could change everything. "If I asked you for something crazy, would you still be my best friend?" Her thumb hovered over the send button for the 100th time tonight. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she did not notice. She could still taste the edge of fear in her mouth, more bitter than the stale espresso. She thought about all the nights she had stayed awake thinking about how she had waited too long, how she had guarded herself too fiercely, how she was tired of carrying the secret like it was something shameful. Jenna had spent her 20s building walls. Watching her mother get left behind by a father who disappeared before Jenna could even speak her first word taught her to never trust a promise you could not hold in your hands. She built a career as a ghostwriter, slipping words into other people's mouths, while hers stayed locked behind her teeth. She wrote love stories for people who did not know how to say, "I love you." But when it came to her own heart, she stayed silent. Except with him, Ethan Rhodes, her best friend since she was 13 years old, the boy who used to toss pebbles at her bedroom window when her stepdad was shouting too loud. The man who became something bigger than life itself when he built his first tech startup in a crammed dorm room and turned it into a billion-dollar media company before 30. The friend who never let her down, not once, not ever. He would never laugh at her for this. She knew that deep in her bones. But what if asking him broke the very thing she loved most about him? What if a single night ruined 2 decades of friendship that had survived distance, heartbreak, failure, and every reason to drift apart? Jenna pressed her palm to the window, watching a couple hurry past, arm in arm, footprints melting into the slush on the sidewalk. She could picture Ethan's face so clearly if she closed her eyes, that grin that always found her in any room, no matter how crowded. The soft dark hair that never stayed neat for more than 10 minutes. The way he looked at her, like she was the only thing in the world that made sense when everything else fell apart. She wanted to believe asking him would not ruin anything, that he would say yes, and then they would go back to being just friends, that he would keep her safe for one night, the way he had kept her safe her entire life. But something deep inside her chest whispered that nothing would ever be the same again. The phone buzzed once on the table, jolting her heart into her throat. A text from Ethan. "Still stuck in meetings, you alive over there? Need me to swing by? I will bring you real coffee, not that burnt stuff." She stared at the blinking cursor on her own message. Then she took a breath that tasted like snow and secrets and pressed send. "If I asked you for something crazy, would you still be my best friend?" Ethan Rhodes was not the kind of man who ignored a message from Jenna Carter, not even on the busiest night of his life. At 33, he had learned how to run boardrooms, break deals apart, and build them back up in his favor. But when his phone buzzed with her name, everything else blurred out like background noise. He left his senior team bickering over ad budgets and stepped out into the crisp Boston air, the city alive and humming around him. For all the billions under his signature, it was moments like this that reminded him he was still just a boy from the shipyards who knew how to drop everything when Jenna needed him. He found her exactly where he knew she would be, in that old coffee shop tucked behind a bookstore near Harvard Square. She had claimed the same corner table since they were teenagers, notebooks spread across cheap laminate, a pen chewed at the end when she was thinking too hard. Even now, with the city moving fast outside, Jenna Carter was the kind of woman people overlooked at first glance, quiet on the outside but a storm if you knew where to look. She ghost-wrote novels for people with pretty faces and no words of their own, tucked away in her rented apartment with a battered laptop and a view of nothing but brick walls. She was a collector of other people's stories because her own felt too fragile to tell. Except to him, only to him. They had met at 13 in a run-down library during an after-school tutoring program. Ethan was the cocky kid who pretended he did not care about anything, while Jenna was the shy girl who read behind the shelves just to avoid the chaos at home. He asked her for a pencil. She offered him her sandwich when she realized he had not eaten. It was that simple. The rest of their childhood stitched itself around stolen afternoons at the library, late-night calls when Jenna's mother worked double shifts, and Ethan's reckless promises that someday they would both get out of the neighborhood that never gave them a real chance. 15 years later, Ethan was the CEO of Rhodes Media, a digital empire that made him headlines and kept him up at night reading through contracts thicker than some of the books Jenna used to lend him. He wore suits tailored in London, stayed in penthouses in New York, but every winter, without fail, he came back to Boston to see her. It was the one ritual neither of them ever broke. Their friendship anniversary, Ethan called it. Even when other people joked that it looked like something more, people always assumed they had crossed that line years ago. Strangers, friends, even exes wondered how a man like Ethan could stay best friends with a woman like Jenna without at least trying once to blur the boundary. But they never did. Not really. Not until now. When Ethan pushed through the cafe door that night, shaking snow from his coat, he found her exactly how he pictured her. Hunched over her cold coffee, phone screen lighting her face like a confession, she looked up, eyes wide, mouth half open as if the words were stuck on her tongue. He wanted to joke that she always looked like she was about to run when she had something important to say, but something in her eyes kept him quiet. Instead, he slid into the seat across from her, his long coat still dusted with flakes that melted on the chipped tabletop, the city outside blurred behind fogged windows. For a second, the only thing that existed was her and him and the space between them. "What's the crazy thing you need, Carter?" he asked, voice low, using her last name the way he always did when he wanted to make her smile. She just looked at him like she was memorizing every detail, as if she was searching his face for all the answers to questions she was too scared to ask. Jenna felt her throat tighten as she took in the Ethan the world saw, the confident grin, the easy posture, the watch that probably cost more than her entire rent for a year. But underneath all that was still the boy who knocked on her window when her mother passed out on the couch, who stayed up all night reading her first draft of a terrible story just because she was too afraid to send it to anyone else. He was safe. He was her safe place in a world that had never felt safe, and now she was about to risk it all with just a few words. Ethan leaned closer, his shoulder brushing hers as he tugged the phone from her hand to read the last message again. He could feel how cold her fingers were. He wanted to warm them, but did not know how to reach across a line she had never let him touch before. "Talk to me, Jenna. I can handle crazy, you know that." She swallowed, her voice a whisper that trembled like glass about to break. "I don't want my first time to be a mistake. I want it to mean something, and I trust you, Ethan. I trust you more than anyone." And in that tiny cafe with snow swirling outside, Ethan Rhodes, who had made a fortune building walls around himself, felt his carefully ordered life tilt on an axis he could never push back. Ethan did not answer her right away. He just sat there staring at her as if she had spoken in another language. Jenna hated the silence more than she hated the risk of asking him. She wished he would laugh or call her ridiculous or tell her she was out of her mind, anything but this heavy quiet that made her stomach twist. Finally, he leaned back and dragged a hand through his hair, which never stayed neat for longer than an hour anyway. He looked around the cafe, as if the walls could offer him advice. Then he looked back at her with eyes that knew every version of her she had ever been brave enough to show him. "Jenna, you don't have to do this with me," he said slowly, like he was choosing each word with surgical precision. She flinched as if the rejection had already come, but she held his gaze because she owed him that much. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing the back of her knuckles, the same way he used to do when they were teenagers, huddled together on her porch steps at 2 a.m. It felt so innocent, and yet tonight it felt like standing on the edge of something that would swallow them both whole. "You deserve a night you'll remember for all the right reasons," he continued, softer now. "Not because you asked your idiot best friend to make it easy." Jenna felt heat rush to her cheeks, and she hated that it probably showed. She pulled her hand back, curling it around the cold coffee mug, just to have something to do with her fingers. "I don't want perfect, Ethan. I want safe. I want it to be with someone who won't use it against me or turn it into a story to tell someone else. And I want it to be with someone who knows me enough to know when to stop if I get scared." Ethan's jaw tensed. He hated hearing her talk like that, like she expected betrayal at every turn. He knew why she did. He had seen firsthand the boyfriends who pretended to worship her, but left when they realized Jenna Carter was not the kind of girl who gave everything on a first date, or a second, or a 10th. She was cautious, stubbornly so, and it only made him love her more in ways he had buried so deep he could almost pretend they were not there. He leaned forward, lowering his voice until it was just for her. "You know what you're asking for, right? You know this won't just be something we can forget in the morning." Jenna's throat felt tight, but her answer came clear. "I know." He watched her for another moment, then let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in his chest for years. "Okay, not here, though. Not like this." Before she could ask what he meant, he stood up, tossing a few bills on the table for the coffee they had barely touched. He helped her into her coat like he always did, tugging the collar up to her chin, then brushing a snowflake from her hair, as if he could stall for time, but the decision had already been made. They stepped out into the Boston night together, the snow crunching under their boots, as they walked toward his car parked under a streetlight, half buried in fresh flakes. He opened the passenger door for her, waited until she was settled, then slid behind the wheel, his fingers drumming the leather as the engine hummed to life. She expected him to drive to his place, maybe the penthouse he kept downtown for nights when he stayed over between flights and meetings. Instead, he took the highway out of the city, heading north, where the lights of Boston gave way to stretches of pine and unlit roads that curved like secrets waiting to be told. After half an hour, Jenna glanced at him, her breath fogging the window. "Where are we going?" He did not take his eyes off the road. "Somewhere that feels like us." It was nearly midnight when he pulled off onto a narrow drive lined with tall, dark trees. At the end of the path sat a cabin that looked like something out of the books she used to write for other people. Warm lights glowing through thick curtains, smoke curling from a stone chimney, snow piling on the wooden steps, like it was meant to be there. Jenna turned to him, a question forming, but he answered before she could speak. "I bought it 3 years ago. I never told you because it felt like my own little escape. I come here when I can't breathe in the city anymore." She followed him up the steps, boots crunching in the fresh layer of snow. Inside, the air smelled like pine and something sweeter, wood smoke and cedar and the faint memory of him. Ethan shrugged out of his coat, and she did the same, her hands trembling only slightly as she traced her fingertips along the stone fireplace, the books stacked on the side table, the heavy blankets folded neatly over the couch. It looked lived in, but untouched at the same time, like a part of him she was only now being allowed to see. He busied himself with the fireplace, tossing another log on the embers, until warmth spread through the room. When he finally turned back to her, he looked less like the Ethan who owned half the streaming platforms in the country, and more like the boy who used to build blanket forts in her living room to keep the shouting out. He crossed the room to stand in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. "If we do this, it's going to be because you're sure," he said, voice low, steady. "Not because you think you owe me anything. Not because you're scared of someone else. Just because you want me." She wanted to argue, tell him it was not about wanting him, but she knew that would be a lie. She did want him. Not just because he was Ethan, but because he had always been Ethan. Because even now, with all the quiet between them, she trusted him more than she trusted herself. She nodded, unable to find words that would not crack her wide open. Ethan lifted his hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing along her jaw like he was trying to memorize how she felt under his skin. When he leaned in, his breath was warm against her temple, but he did not kiss her. Yet, instead, he whispered the one promise he knew she needed more than anything else. "I won't hurt you, Jenna. I swear." And when he finally kissed her, it was gentle at first, a question more than an answer. Her hands found the collar of his sweater, tugging him closer until there was no space left to question anything at all. The fire cracked beside them, the snow fell silent against the window, and somewhere in the soft glow of that cabin, Jenna Carter let herself fall. Hours later, wrapped in heavy blankets tangled around Ethan's bare chest, she realized it did not feel like giving something away at all. It felt like finding something she had always been missing. It felt like coming home and yet standing at the edge of a cliff all at once. Ethan's fingers traced lazy circles on her hip, his breath even and quiet against her hair. But Jenna lay wide awake, her mind racing with the one truth she could not let herself say aloud. If this changed everything, she did not know how to live in a world where Ethan Rhodes was not hers in every way that mattered. She turned her head just enough to see him in the low firelight, his lashes casting shadows over cheeks that looked softer in sleep than they ever did in daylight. She almost said it then, 3 small words that had no business in the space between best friends who had just crossed a line they promised not to blur again. But she swallowed them down, pressed a kiss to his collarbone, and let her eyes drift shut instead. Outside, the storm kept falling, burying the road back to Boston under inches of fresh snow that neither of them was ready to clear just yet. When Jenna woke the next morning, the sun was pouring through the gaps in the heavy curtains, turning the small cabin into a soft golden glow that made the night before feel like something out of someone else's life. She blinked at the unfamiliar ceiling, then at the warm weight of Ethan's arm draped over her waist. His hand curled possessively against her stomach, like even in sleep he could not let her go. For a moment, she let herself sink into it, the safety, the warmth, the dangerous comfort that came with knowing exactly who held her. She did not want to move. She wanted to stay in that slice of borrowed morning forever. But the thoughts she had pushed aside last night were waiting right there at the edge of her mind, whispering warnings she could not unhear. Carefully, she slid out from under his arm, sitting on the edge of the bed as she pulled his sweater over her bare shoulders, the fabric smelling like pine and something undeniably him. She heard him stir behind her, felt the mattress dip as he sat up, his voice still rough with sleep. "Where are you going?" She did not turn around, just pressed her fingers to her temples to quiet the swirl of questions she was not ready to speak aloud. "Just needed some air. I'll make coffee." Before he could stop her, she padded across the wooden floor to the small kitchen, her bare feet cold against the polished boards. She busied herself with the old coffee maker, filling it with water, grounding her shaking hands in the simple, mundane ritual. When Ethan appeared in the doorway, shirtless, hair tousled, eyes soft in a way that made her chest ache, she pretended she did not notice how he was looking at her, like she was something he did not know how to hold without breaking. He crossed the room, leaning his hip against the counter, arms folded across his chest. For a minute, neither of them said anything, the coffee maker gurgling between them like a heartbeat, trying to fill the silence. Then he asked it the question she knew was coming. "Are you okay?" She almost laughed at the ridiculous understatement of it all, but the sound caught in her throat and came out like a broken sigh instead. "I'm fine. It was good, Ethan, really good." She knew he could hear the lie in her voice because Ethan had always known how to read her better than she could read herself. He stepped forward, reaching out like he might touch her face, then stopped halfway, hand hovering like he was afraid if he laid a finger on her the truth might spill out. "It doesn't have to mean anything you don't want it to mean, Jenna. You know that, right?" His words were careful, the same way he spoke to skittish investors or unpredictable journalists. But Jenna heard what he was not saying. He was giving her an out, an escape hatch, in case she regretted what they had done. It was exactly what made him safe, and what made her heart twist in ways she could not untangle. Before she could answer, the coffee maker sputtered to life, filling the tiny cabin with the familiar bitter smell of burnt grounds and second chances. She focused on pouring 2 mugs, watching the steam rise as if it could hide the storm building behind her ribs. Ethan took his cup without another word, leaning back against the counter like the conversation was over, but Jenna could feel the question hanging between them, unspoken and heavier than any snowstorm outside. They spent the rest of the morning pretending they were still just best friends stuck in a cabin waiting out the snow. They talked about her next ghostwriting project, about the new series Ethan's company was launching, about anything except what had happened on that bed just hours before. By the time they packed up to head back to Boston, the roads were clear, but nothing inside her felt any less buried. She watched the pine slip by through the car window, her reflection ghosted in the glass like a version of herself she did not quite recognize. Back in the city, life snapped back too quickly. Ethan was swallowed by meetings and calls in high-rise offices with windows that looked out over a skyline that never slept. Jenna holed up in her apartment, rewriting the same chapter over and over because the words that came too easily for other people would not come for her own story. They texted, they called, they saw each other, but not the way they used to. There was a new edge to every conversation, a pause in every laugh, a question in every silence that neither of them dared to answer out loud. A week passed, then 2. One night, Jenna found herself sitting on her couch staring at a photo of Ethan in a glossy magazine. Spread the headline shouting about the billionaire media mogul who was rumored to be back with his ex, Chloe Madison. Chloe was everything Jenna was not. Polished, connected from old money with a last name that opened doors Jenna did not even know existed. The photo showed Chloe slipping her arm through Ethan's at a charity gala, her smile sharp enough to slice through any fantasy Jenna had dared to hold on to. She wanted to believe it was nothing. Ethan had told her Chloe was business only, that the Madison family's PR connections were too valuable to let personal history get in the way. But in the photo, Chloe was looking at him like she had already won him back, like Jenna had just been a stopover, a mistake to be politely forgotten. When the lights came on, Jenna dropped her phone on the couch like it had burned her palm. She hated how easily the old doubts came back, the voices telling her she should have never asked for something that was never hers to keep. She pulled her knees to her chest, burying her face in her arms, wishing she could bottle up the night in the cabin, keep it somewhere safe, untouchable. But the truth was already seeping through the crack. She was falling, and this time she was not sure Ethan would be there to catch her. When he called the next day, she let it ring. When he knocked on her door, she pretended she was not home. She told herself she was protecting what they still had left, but deep down she knew she was just trying to protect herself from hearing him say out loud that it had all been a mistake. 3 days later, Monica, her only other real friend, found her at their usual coffee shop, the same one where this had all begun. Monica took one look at her and sat down without asking, Jenna's untouched latte in front of her and a pointed expression that said she was not leaving without answers. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," Monica said, blunt as ever. Jenna traced her finger around the rim of her cup, watching the swirl of milk and coffee like it could spell out a way to undo everything. "I messed up, Mon. I asked him for something I shouldn't have, and now I think I broke us." Monica leaned back, crossing her arms. "You and Ethan are unbreakable. You two have survived worse than whatever this is. Tell me what happened." So Jenna told her all of it. The snowstorm, the cabin, The way Ethan had touched her like she was something fragile and precious and real. She left out the part where she had fallen asleep telling herself she would not say "I love you," because that was the one truth too sharp to say out loud. Monica listened, her silence more comforting than any words could have been. When Jenna finally stopped talking, Monica reached across the table and squeezed her hand hard enough to anchor her to something that did not feel like quicksand. "If you think for 1 second that man does not love you, you're a bigger fool than I thought," Monica said. "He's loved you since we were all kids, trying to scrape together bus fare home. Everyone knows it but you." Jenna wanted to believe her, but the image of Chloe's perfect smile kept flashing behind her eyelids every time she closed them. "Then why does it feel like he's already moved on?" Monica shook her head, eyes softening. "Because you're scared. Because he's scared. And because you two are too damn stubborn to say what you really want." Jenna let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. "What if I already ruined it, Mon? What if I asked for too much and now I can't go back?" Monica leaned in, her voice quiet but fierce. "Then fight for it, or at least let him fight for you. But don't you dare run from this because you're afraid it might hurt. Love hurts sometimes, Jenna, but so does pretending you don't want it." Later that night, Jenna lay in bed staring at her phone. Ethan's name at the top of her screen, his last message unread. "I miss you, Carter." Just 3 words, but they felt like an open door she did not know how to step through. She wanted to reply. She wanted to call. She wanted to show up at his place and demand he tell her it was not a mistake, that he did not regret every moment they had crossed that line. But her thumb hovered and her fear whispered louder than her heart. She locked her phone, turned off the lamp, and let the dark swallow her whole. Somewhere in the city, Ethan was probably doing the same thing, wide awake, in a penthouse that felt bigger and emptier than any cabin in Vermont ever could. Ethan did not sleep much that week. He buried himself in back-to-back meetings, flew to New York for 2 days of negotiations that could have been done on a call, and let his team think he was just driven, as always. But underneath the polished suits and the sharp words he tossed around conference tables, his mind kept circling back to one thing: Jenna. In his sweater, standing barefoot in that cabin kitchen, trying to hold herself together while he pretended he could give her space she did not really want. The memory burned him more than any failed deal ever could. He hated the silence more than he hated anything. Jenna had never shut him out like this, not even when her stepdad left, or when her first book deal fell apart, or when she found out her mother's cancer had come back for the 2nd time. He had always been her first call, the one person who did not need to be invited in because he was already there. But now she was nowhere. He checked his phone between every meeting, read her unread message so many times he could recite it in his sleep. "I just need some time. Please don't hate me." She had sent it 4 days ago, and then nothing. It felt like a door slammed shut with him on the outside for the first time in 15 years. Late Friday night, Ethan sat alone in his office high above the city, the Boston skyline spread out like a promise he was too tired to believe in. His assistant had gone home hours ago. The building was quiet, but he could not bring himself to leave. He thought maybe if he just sat still long enough, Jenna might appear at the door the way she used to when she brought him dinner during finals week, or when she waited for him to finish late calls so they could grab cheap pizza at 2 in the morning. But the door stayed closed, and the only thing that stared back at him was his own reflection in the black glass. He picked up his phone again, scrolling past the headlines about Chloe and the gala and the whispers that the Rhodes-Madison merger was all but sealed now. He hated every word of it. Chloe had shown up at that charity event, uninvited, smiled for the cameras, and whispered that she could fix his PR nightmare if he played along. She always knew where to strike. She knew how to make Jenna feel like she did not belong because Chloe had once done the same thing to him, reminding him exactly what circles he would never truly fit in. He should have shut it down that night. He should have told Jenna everything before the photos made their rounds. He should have known silence would be the one thing she could not survive. By the time he slammed his laptop shut, Ethan knew exactly where he needed to be. He grabbed his coat, ignored the messages pinging his phone, and walked out of that office like it had never owned him. An hour later, he was standing in front of her building, his breath making small ghosts in the freezing air. He buzzed her door 3 times, knowing full well she would not answer, and when that failed, he did what he had always done. He used the spare key she had given him 10 years ago when her front lock stuck every winter. Inside, her apartment smelled like lavender and old books, warm in a way that made his throat ache. He found her sitting on the floor in front of her couch, knees drawn up, laptop open but untouched. She did not even flinch when he stepped inside. She just lifted her head, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left that words could fix unless they were the truth. Ethan dropped his keys on the table and sank down onto the floor across from her, his knees bumping hers. He hated the way she looked at him, like he was a stranger who might say the one thing she could not bear to hear. "Talk to me, Jenna, please." She let out a bitter laugh that scraped at the edges of her voice. "What do you want me to say, Ethan? That I'm fine? That it didn't mean anything? That I'm happy seeing you all over the damn internet with Chloe draped on your arm?" He winced because he deserved it, every word of it. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, wrapping her arms around her legs tighter, as if she could make herself small enough to disappear. "It's not what you think." "It's always not what I think," she shot back. "Except this time it is. She's perfect for you, Ethan. She belongs in your world. I'm just the girl you grew up with in a house that smelled like cigarettes and stale coffee. I'm the secret you keep in cabins in Vermont, so no one asks too many questions." The accusation stung more because it was not true. He leaned closer, his voice sharp now because he needed her to hear him through every wall she had thrown up. "You are not a secret. You never have been. Chloe is business, Jenna. She always has been. She knows how to play this game. I don't want that with her. I never did." "Then why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and it gutted him because he had always promised himself he would never be the reason she cried like that. He sucked in a breath, steadying his hands so they would not shake when he finally reached for her again. This time he did not let her pull away. He caught her wrist, pressing her palm flat against his chest so she could feel how hard his heart was beating under her touch. "Because I thought I could keep you safe," he said. "I thought if I kept this simple, if I gave you an easy way out, we could go back to being us. I didn't know how to handle it when I realized I don't want to go back. I don't want safe. I want you." She let out a breath that sounded like a confession. "You're going to break me, Ethan." He shook his head, closing the space between them until his forehead rested against hers. "No, I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving you can't be broken. Not by me." When she kissed him, it tasted like salt and second chances and every stupid, stubborn truth they had buried under years of pretending. She pulled back just enough to look him in the eye, her voice barely a whisper. "Promise me." He kissed her again, slower this time, like a vow sealed with every heartbeat he had left. "I promise." They stayed there on the floor for hours, talking about everything they had never said out loud. He told her about the first time he knew he loved her, when they were 17, and she fell asleep next to him at the library, her head on his shoulder, a paperback slipping from her hand. She told him about the nights she wanted to say "I love you," but did not know if he would stay if she did. They argued, they laughed, they cried until the sun came up over the city skyline and the world outside their window felt like a place they could face together. When dawn broke, Ethan pulled her into his lap, her legs draped over his, her head tucked under his chin. "Come with me this weekend," he said. "Anywhere, just us. No cameras, no Chloe, no headlines." Jenna looked up at him, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. "Where?" He grinned, the boy she remembered shining through the man he had become. "Back to the cabin. Or Paris. or that stupid beach house you always wanted in Maine. I don't care, as long as you're there." She smiled then, a real one, the kind that made him feel like maybe they were not doomed to repeat the same mistakes after all. "Okay, but next time you disappear into boardrooms for days, I'm changing the locks." He laughed, pressing his mouth to her temple. "Deal." And when he finally stood up, helping her to her feet, it felt less like an ending and more like the beginning of something they had both been writing in the spaces between every mischance. As he wrapped her in his coat and kissed her forehead, he realized maybe some lines were never meant to stay uncrossed. They did not run away to Paris or Maine that weekend like they had half-dared each other to do, sitting on Jenna's cold apartment floor with dawn breaking behind them. Instead, they went back to the cabin, because it was theirs, the place where the lie they had told the world unraveled and the truth found its voice. Ethan drove them out of the city at sunset, one hand on the wheel, the other wrapped around Jenna's fingers like he was afraid she might change her mind halfway there. She did not. She spent the ride watching the lights of Boston disappear behind them, her head resting against the window, as if she was afraid to look at him too long in case it made everything too real too fast. When they got to the cabin, the air was sharper than before, the late February wind cutting through the trees and rattling the window frames. Ethan built a fire while Jenna unpacked the bag she had thrown together in 15 panicked minutes, the same bag that still smelled like her shampoo, and the lavender candles she burned to calm her mind when words refused to come. They did not talk much that first night back. Instead, they moved around each other like they had lived in that tiny cabin their whole lives. Ethan cooked pasta that he overcooked on purpose, just to make her roll her eyes and call him hopeless. She curled up on the couch with her legs over his lap while he read emails he did not really read because he was too busy tracing shapes on her shins with his fingertips. It felt normal, painfully normal for something that had once felt so impossible. But normal did not last. Nothing that raw ever does. The second night, a storm blew in, thick, heavy snow slamming against the windows like a reminder that they were not as safe from the world as they wanted to pretend. Ethan woke sometime after midnight to find Jenna sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, eyes glassy and distant as the screen glowed blue on her face. He watched her for a long minute, trying to guess which ghost had crawled into her chest while he slept. He knew that look. He had seen it too many times when her mother got sick, when she lost her first real book deal, when she learned how easy it was to let the world tell her what she deserved. He pushed off the blankets and crossed the creaky wooden floor barefoot, not caring that the chill bit at his skin. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, voice careful. "You're writing." She did not look up from the screen. "Trying." He stepped closer enough to see the words flicker on her screen. They were not client notes or some fake celebrity memoir she would never put her name on. They were hers. For once, they were hers. He felt something ache in his ribs because he knew she only did this when she was about to run. "Talk to me, Carter. What is it?" She closed the laptop so slowly it felt like watching a door slam in slow motion. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were sharp, bright, and tired all at once. "What are we doing, Ethan? Really? Are we just hiding here until the snow melts, pretending like there's not a whole world waiting to remind us why this is stupid?" He hated that word stupid, because nothing about this felt stupid to him. Dangerous, maybe. Risky? Definitely terrifying. Always, but never stupid. He sat down across from her, pulled the laptop aside, and took both her hands in his. "I'm not pretending. I'm trying to figure out how to hold on to the one thing that has ever made sense to me, and I'm scared as hell I'm going to screw it up." She shook her head, pulling one hand free to swipe at the tear she did not want him to see. "You don't get it. You're Ethan Rhodes. You can mess up and fix it with a check and a smile. I mess up and I lose everything. You get to walk away and still be you. I walk away and I'm—" She broke off, voice cracking so low he had to lean in to hear her. "I'm nothing without this." He felt anger flare, sharp and protective, because if there was one thing he could not stand, it was hearing her talk like she was anything less than the reason he was who he was. He squeezed her hand tighter. Don't you dare. Don't you ever say that again. You are not nothing you never were. Not when you were that kid hiding behind books. Not when you were working 3 jobs to pay your mother's medical bills. Not when you gave me every word I ever needed to sell myself to the world. You think Rhodes Media exists without you telling me how to sound like someone worth trusting? It doesn't. She laughed, a sound that was half sob, half disbelief. I'd ghostwrite a few speeches. You'd still be a billionaire without me. He leaned forward, forehead almost touching hers, voice rough. I'd have the money, sure, but I wouldn't have this. I wouldn't have a single thing worth going home to. I wouldn't have a reason to wake up and give a damn about any of it. She pulled back, wiping her cheeks with her sleeves, but he did not let her go far. He stood, dragging her up with him, arms wrapping around her so tight she felt his heart beat like a drum against her ribs. I'm not Chloe Jenna. I'm not my father. I'm not the guy who leaves when it gets too hard. You want to run, fine, but I'm running with you. Pick a direction. Paris, Maine, I don't care. I'm not losing you because you're scared of being worth it. She buried her face in his chest, the tears soaking into his t-shirt, the words muffled but sharp enough to slice him clean open. Promise me you won't get tired. Promise me you won't look at me one day and remember how easy it would be with someone else. He tipped her chin up, forcing her to look at him even through the blur of tears. I promise you there is no someone else. There never was, there never will be. You're it, Carter. You've always been it. She kissed him then, desperate, hungry like she was trying to swallow every doubt she had ever learned to carry. He lifted her onto the table, knocking her laptop to the floor, neither of them caring when it clattered against the wood. The storm howled against the walls, but inside the cabin, it felt like the safest place on earth. Afterward, they lay tangled on the floor, wrapped in the blanket he had pulled off the couch, the fire burning low but warm enough to keep them pressed together. She traced circles on his chest with her fingertip, her voice so soft he almost did not hear her. I wrote something tonight. For me, for once. He smiled into her hair, pressing his lips to her forehead. Good. I want to read it. She shook her head. Not yet. Maybe someday. Maybe when we're ready to tell the truth. He pulled back just enough to see her eyes, the calm in them fighting the storm. What truth? She held his gaze, unflinching for once. That I've been in love with my best friend since the day he asked me for a pencil in a library we both hated. And that every story I've ever written for someone else was really just trying to tell this one. Ethan felt something in his chest shift, settle like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. He kissed her again, slower this time. A promise and a question, all at once. Then let's tell it. Together. And this time you get your name on the cover. Outside, the snow kept falling, but neither of them noticed because they were too busy rewriting the ending they thought they had already ruined. 3 months later, Jenna Carter sat in the same corner booth of the same coffee shop where this had all started, her laptop open in front of her, the soft hum of the city carrying on outside like it had no idea she was about to do something terrifying and beautiful all at once. She looked up when the door swung open, the old bell above it jingling in that familiar way, and there he was, Ethan Rhodes, her best friend, her impossible, her home, walking straight toward her like he owned the whole damn place, just because she was in it. He dropped a kiss on the top of her head, slid into the seat across from her and lifted her hand off the table so he could lace his fingers through hers, like he always did when he needed her to know he was right there, even when he could not find the words. So, he said, eyes flicking to her laptop screen, then back to her face with that grin that still made her stomach do stupid things she refused to name. Did you do it? Jenna swallowed hard, her thumb brushing over the edge of his ring, the one he had given her 2 weeks ago in that same cabin under the same stars they had always pretended not to wish on. Yeah, she said, voice low but steady. I sent the manuscript to the publisher this morning. Under my name, no more ghost, Just me. Ethan's smile spread slow and wide and proud in that way that always made her feel bigger than the small doubts that still curled around her when the nights got too quiet. That's my girl. She rolled her eyes but could not fight her smile. She thought about the nights they had spent tangled in blankets and arguments, and the promise that the truth would not scare them apart this time. She thought about Chloe's polite congratulations when the engagement made the rounds in the papers, and how for the first time, Jenna had not felt like she was fighting for a place she did not belong. She thought about Monica, who cried harder than she did when Ethan dropped to one knee on that wooden cabin floor and promised her the rest of his life without any more secrets between them. Mostly she thought about how a single reckless question had rewritten every rule she thought she had to follow to be loved. Ethan tugged her hand across the table, pressed his lips to her knuckles, then rested their joined hands on the table between the empty coffee mugs, and the half-finished notes for her book tour she still could not believe was real. "Scared?" he asked, not mocking, just honest, because they had promised each other honesty, even when it hurt. She nodded, because the truth was safer now than any lie she used to tell herself. Terrified. He squeezed her hand, a quiet vow hidden in the simple weight of his grip. Good. Means it matters. She laughed, soft and tired, and so full of a life she finally wanted to claim. Outside Boston kept moving the same way it always did, indifferent to who fell in love, who stayed, who ran, who finally chose to stay still long enough to let someone love them back, the messy, imperfect way real love always did. She looked at Ethan, his grin, his soft eyes, the boy who once asked her for a pencil and stayed long enough to watch her write the rest of her life in the margins of every promise he ever made her. "You know what's funny?" she said, voice warm like a secret only they could share. "What?" he asked, leaning in so close their foreheads almost touched over the cluttered table. "I thought asking you for that one night would ruin us, but it saved us instead." He kissed her then, right there in the coffee shop where the barista pretended not to stare, and the world kept turning, and for once, Jenna did not care about any of it because this was her story now, and she was going to write it exactly how she wanted. No ghost, no half-truths, no waiting for the perfect ending that never came, just her and him and every terrifying, beautiful choice that would keep them rewriting what forever looked like, one stubborn chapter at a time. Sometimes love does not come crashing through your door, all fireworks and grand gestures. Sometimes it's a question whispered across a sticky cafe table. Sometimes it's your best friend, holding your hand so tight you finally believe you deserve every impossible thing you ever thought you were asking for. So here's the truth. Ask for it. Risk it. Be reckless enough to want it all. Because sometimes the story you were most afraid to write is the only one that really matters.